Building secure software is of paramount importance in a world that is on an accelerated digitization path. Welcome to the Purple Book Podcast, where we host thought leaders and security practitioners to tackle the monumental challenge of building secure software. Our mission is to spread awareness, challenges, and best practices in secure software development. This show is your guide to hearing inspiring stories of leaders building secure software against odds, and getting to know the personal stories of these leaders who make it all happen. Here are your hosts, the members of the Purple Book community.
Hi, and welcome to this Purple Book Community podcast. My name is Mark Lambert, a community member, and I'm really happy and excited to have MJ from Databricks with us here today. MJ is head of product security at Databricks and has got great experiences on that journey for product security. So MJ, go ahead, introduce yourself. Give us a little bit about how you got here and how you got into product security.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me over. Okay, so my security journey actually started with Symantec back in India. This was like the first team of security getting formed in Symantec, and they asked me to join in. So started from there, started with some basic stuff like fuzzing, breaking into stuff, general exploit writing, and at the same time, from a defensive side, threat modeling and code reviews. So usually you find a lot of stuff when you start reading the code. When I moved to Citrix, this was around 2012 when I became a manager in Citrix after 1 year in Citrix. And since then, I have been helping Citrix to build a program which was scalable, something where we tried to cover all sorts of function in product security, including defensive, offensive, customer-facing, all sorts of stuff. And that continued for a good decade, I would say, before I moved to Databricks earlier this year, actually more like 10 months back. So overarchingly, journey has been interesting. I've had an opportunity to learn all the domains, I would think, which is related to writing code and how do you secure that. So be it setting up SDLC programs, from how do you define requirements for the team? How do you prioritize those things and try to push those things in? How do you do a design review and make architectural decision making, right? Get into how do you optimize on code reviews when you can skip. Like, security is not about getting to absolute security. It's all about risk management, right? So at what point do you set a threshold that this is good enough risk I can live with, or at this point I need to get involved? End-to-end exploit writing, exploit chaining, and a bunch of things, red teaming, setting up product security incident response functions. How do you set up your architecture in a way that logging, distributed tracing, and all those things is set up so that forensic is supported well? And I have been involved into mergers and acquisitions analysis. I've done that, and a lot of customer-facing calls. That's you have to make money, right? So
yes, and a lot of convincing and explaining what your approach is, so that you're going to be that your customer's going to trust you, right, at the end of the day. So as you've been going through this journey and you've been setting up the programs, what do you feel are your top 3 challenges? What are the things that people need to look out for and prepare, and how do you meet those challenges?
So as I was brought into Databricks, that was the exact same challenge I was faced with, right? Databricks did not have a product security team at that point, or let us say the product security team was a month old. So when I was brought in, the charter was, okay, you need to do a product sec setup. The first step is always to not make an assumption and go ahead and actually interview the engineering, all the other counterparts, just to understand, right, what is the real state of things, right? You can't just. So the beauty of ProdSec is that even though it's written in a book as a simple flow, every company is different. You can't just go and bring in one system and apply it everywhere. It just doesn't work that way. So one is to understand where the gaps are, and then you start filling in those things. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face today on ProdSec world is how do you scale up your security at the velocity of development and releases, right? Because we are doing releases literally every 2 weeks, right? And I was looking at the sheer number of features which are coming in, and they cross something like more than 200 features coming in every quarter.
Mm-hmm.
With any size of project team, if you have to actually do the traditional SDLC, go through design reviews, code reviews, threat models, pen testing, you cannot do that for 200 features every quarter. You just cannot do it. There has to be a prioritization, there has to be velocity, and there has to be an automation. Whatever we can remove by automation is something. So basically the idea is to first find out which is the domain where you can automate, where you can optimize on things, where all we can plug in and hook in the things. And then we can extract out the things which are more specific to human assessment, which is not something automation can achieve, and then prioritize those.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one part of it, the velocity. The second part is about, there are requirements in terms of different compliances, right? Like when people try to sell stuff, FedRAMP, PCI, HIPAA, like so many compliances, right? And inherently, I don't care from ProdSec about going into compliances, because compliance is a good check mark, but the reality is that security is different, right? But we still have to handle responses on every new CV that comes up. How are our containers, how are our systems in the cloud working out, and are they vulnerable or not? And how much of that you can automate and throw it out, right? So a full automation pipeline is something which is very crucial if you want to really extract time for core research into ProdSec. That's another thing. Pen testing is a big challenge in itself, because pen testing, it requires time. And when you try to get into things, how would you, usually you would do a white box pen test because you are internal to the team. But a white box pen test would imply that it's going to take its own sweet time to read code, to identify weaknesses, and then do an exploitation. And those, unless they are credible exploit or exploit chains, a lot of times engineering will typically have a pushback on, yeah, it's not important enough, right? Or maybe we can delay by a couple of quarters on this one. So to build that rapport with your partners in the engineering team to help prioritize the bugs in a way that our risk is minimized, that's in itself a big challenge. I can go on about it, but I mean, those are some of the big things.
Yeah, and you touched upon, I think, your three key areas, right? So first is speed, being able to respond, and the only way you respond to that speed is automation and prioritization, and then the third piece is that collaboration with the developers. So you touched upon it briefly there about building rapport. Is the providing credible context and the reason behind the prioritization the key for building that rapport and making sure that you have a true collaborative workflow? Or are there other hidden gems in there that you can really think of from prior experiences where you've been successful?
I think one of the best ways to build a rapport with the engineering is to not think that they don't know stuff. I've seen a lot of people making that mistake, right? Like, hey, we know security, they don't understand security. That's not the case. Let's not underestimate what people think, right? So you start from there, and then the general approach, which has always worked, is that acknowledge that their priority is your priority, right? That's important. And the second stage is that we can create or we can demonstrate actual active outcomes, which in their assessment is one, technically credible, and second, it definitely improves the quality of the product. We do that a few times, and then the developers, our partner teams, they start to trust us. That, yeah, when these guys are saying something, it's not an error, it's highly prioritized, and it is something which is of high quality. Mm-hmm. And then you stop being a team which is outside the partners, and you start actually becoming partners. You become a part of the engineering, and everything becomes simple after that. So it's that initial credibility set which is important, and we have to, like, I don't believe in the hammer approach that, hey, I tell you what to do in security and you go and do it, right? That's not how it works, because that's the easiest way to be unsuccessful. So
yeah, and I think that resonates with with other conversations I've had with other leaders as well, is that you have to build that partnership and understanding the context. So, you put it very well, their problems are your problems, their priorities are your priorities, and kind of like being both on the same page. Earlier, you also talked about containers and cloud and what have you. Really, how would you view product security kind of in that landscape of traditional vulnerability management from an infrastructure perspective, or even traditional application security from a SAST, SCA, DAST perspective? How do you position those three things together?
So if you go into traditional, that's also the world when the cloud was either just the beginning of the things, or it was a lot of on-prem or in customer space, right? Things were fine at that point because the product stack would be synonymous to application security. You go into the product to find defects in the code, it's great, right? But you have fixed the stuff on your product. When you release something, now it's a customer's responsibility, how they deploy it, how they configure it. Maybe there's the best practices we do, but it's customer's responsibility. We never had to worry about it. With the cloud and with the microservice architecture, everything getting in the cloud, things have become more interesting and complex because we are not just the people who give the product, but we are also sort of becoming like the IT team for the customer, right? Because we are deploying the product and they're only using it, right? The moment you become the cloud vendor who is also deploying and managing the product, which we have written, we have to worry about their configurations, we have to worry about their patching, we have to worry about the vulnerabilities, we have to worry about supply chain, right? What we are pushing, where we are pushing into things. All of that becomes a challenge. And therefore, the realm of product security now suddenly goes beyond the application security, and you worry about vulnerability management, and now everything else comes in the picture. Yeah. And it basically becomes because we have become, as I said, effectively the IT team who deploys the product as well in the cloud and manages it for the customer. So the customer is not responsible if we are having a configuration mistake in our network security group, which suddenly allows somebody to do a SSRF and go into it. So that's not something which a customer is going to be responsible for.
Yeah. So and your world is very interesting that way, because there's this delineation that you have to draw between the customer's responsibility and your responsibility as the platform provider. And you said that very well about how the traditional application security, product security really is kind of like elevated that up to a much higher part of the conversation. So as you're looking at what you've done in the past, what would you say was like the number one mistake that you made? The thing that I wish I hadn't done that because it was not productive and conducive towards good product security. What's the number one pitfall you think somebody should avoid?
That's a very interesting question. So I think when I look at the mistakes, and of course people learn from their mistakes. So everything, when I say that, everything is not important, right? Like when you start new, you'll want to believe that this is the right path to go and therefore everybody should follow it, right? And just because I'm able to prove that, let's say, here is a remote code execution, which I was able to prove. And I would be like, this has to go in, right? This has to be fixed. The reality is that maybe in a specific setup, the risk that it poses is not exactly that high. But at the same time, sometimes, even a low severity issue becomes a business critical issue. So the prioritization is something which keeps on improving. Over the years, I think the one change that I have made in my general strategy is moving away from absolute security mindset to an absolute risk mindset. Because the reality is there's so much work, and there's so much work in terms of development as well as resolution and everything. Every organization in the world deals with risk management. And that risk is not about how many people are trained or how you are setting up things. The general GRC is not the kind of risk I'm talking about, but the risk about, if you were to visualize this as a simple dashboard, you would say, what are the number of defects that you have? What criticality they are at, right? Okay, we go a step ahead. What we have done is that we have redefined criticality based on what does this particular kind of problem mean in Databricks context. Like, for example, if you would see Databricks, you would see that we have a simple notebook style environment, like Jupyter notebook style environment, where people can write code and they can run. So if you have that kind of an environment, is really a remote code execution a vulnerability? It's probably not, right? Because that's the feature. That's what you're supposed to do. But if you go in let's say a Microsoft environment and you get a remote code execution, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. So the same vulnerability, just because traditionally it is acknowledged as a critical problem, does not mean it's critical. So the business risk tolerance on some kind of a problems is different based on what kind of business you're dealing with. So we have done that, and you kind of assess that, okay, based on the defects, there's a story. Now, next step, you look at the supply chain, right? This is what we're getting from a third party. You take a look at all the OS containers vulnerabilities where they are lying. You go a step ahead and they say, what does my internal infrastructure look like, right? How secure is my build infrastructure? So you bring in all these different pieces, you put them together, and you start to elevate it to a risk scoring where you understand, okay, and also about how my services are exposed. Not all services and microservices are exposed to the internet with their APIs open. So we have nice API gateway, but there are private APIs and stuff. So based on where the vulnerability lies. So when you bring it to a risk model, and that's something I think is one thing I did not do earlier, we are doing now, which is good. That's a learning, actually, honestly, Mark.
Yeah. No, and you know, we're all constantly learning, and this field is constantly changing, right? So and evolving. I think you touched upon something there that got me thinking about risk, and it's not it has context. And then really you're advising the organization around what the current risk is. And then there's a business decision as to say, are we going to go or no go? Yeah. And I think that what you just talked about, I've heard from others as well before. It's just like, hey, you know, more carrot, less stick from a development perspective. And then at the end of the day, you're an advisor to the business around where the potential risks are, and then the business makes that decision.
I mean, within Databricks, we have built a system where it's not completely the business, but it's between more of a partnership as we have built between the business and the security. So we actually have implemented a full security exception process, which is fully automated. It's integrated with our bug tracking system. And it's something where we trace that, okay, here is the defect. Okay, maybe we need an exception out here or the situation. And we do a full risk assessment. And then between the leadership of security and the leadership of engineering, we kind of finally co-sign the risk that, okay, acceptable or not. So first we have to do a risk calibration based on what it means for us in the product in Databricks. And second, what's the risk tolerance, right? Like, at some situations, you may be high risk tolerance. You're okay to be with something. Other situations, you are, even the most minor things could be a big deal. So the risk tolerance versus the actual risk assessment, you combine those two and you have a picture of what you can live with.
Now, one of the things that a lot of people talk about when you're managing a program and managing a team is hiring is a big challenge. So, you know, you look at, you know, cybersecurity has been a great career direction for people. Kind of, what are your thoughts about hiring and also that career path from, you know, if somebody was wanting to get started, where should they start? And then if somebody's looking to hire, where should they look?
So my general advice to any new professional in the domain is you need to know. So there are two things, right? One, what is your interest? What you like to do, one. But secondly, also take a look at how saturated the market is on a specific area, right? Like if I have to, let's say if I'm a new professional, I have to place into something. I would say that, let's say the web security market is super saturated. People are doing like crazy amount of research. And the reality is that if I'm starting new, it's going to take me a lot of time to grow into that, right? On the other side, if I were, let's say, if I do have an expertise and interest in, let's say, cryptanalysis, right? That, or like the basic applied crypto world and how do you hack into crypto systems and stuff like that, that is a rather less saturated domain, and that could still open up fields for me, right? So it's all about building a niche into something, because you might know a basic of a lot of things, but if you have expertise on at least one niche, it definitely places you much better, like much better. When I'm looking at hiring, I'm mostly looking for people who have a research mindset, and that definitely helps, because my general philosophy is that I can teach you technology, or I can teach you skills. I can't teach you your attitude. So if you have If you are somebody who is a hit and go kind of a guy, it's harder to work with you because you never go deep enough to see what is going on, right? Whereas somebody with research mindset will typically be doing more research, they go into deeper, they won't stop at something at the first block. And that's typically something that we observe in our interviews. So like when I'm doing my interviews with the candidates, I'll usually pose problems which are most of the times not solvable. And I don't expect my interviewee to clear that with the answer. That's not even the expectation. But I want to see whether my interviewee is going to stop thinking at a point saying, I don't see I can do it, or they're willing to go a step and figure out creative ways of solving. Because that tells me that, okay, one, what's your attitude? And secondly, how sharp you are. So I prefer to hire intelligent people that are rather knowledgeable people. I can bring knowledge, but intelligence you can't bring in.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's presenting an unsolvable problem, but seeing how they potentially try to solve that problem is actually a very interesting way of going. So, I know we're getting to the end of our time here today. What would you say is the number one thing that has made you successful in establishing a product security practice? And just maybe a thought around where you think the next step is for you to grow the practice at Databricks, or kind of like the next evolution of the industry as a whole.
So I think the most critical part of any program is going to be the team and the quality of hiring you're doing. That's absolutely the critical thing. And after that, please don't try to dictate what your team does. You bring in smart people, you bring in really sharp guys, and then let the strategy be decided by these guys. We can up-level things, you can resource things, you can say yes or no. You can bring in your own ideas, but if you have brought in really, really good people, like I'm extremely proud of the team we have right now, like extremely proud. I can bet my life on the skill on that. But if I have a team that strong, then do I really need to dictate everything? Because these are the guys who have been in the industry for long enough. They know what is wrong, what is not wrong, what's working in something and not. And that actually helps me a lot in scaling up, in up-leveling our skill set, in up-leveling our team's charter. Like one of the things I strongly do that, okay, I'm here at a checkpoint today, exactly 1 year ahead. I cannot be at the same checkpoint. I need to be significantly ahead. So when I set up a 1 year roadmap, I'm talking about what is it, guys? What is it that we can do to up-level ourselves? And we do like a huge brainstorming strategy session where people will come up there with their ideas and we put them together, prioritize those things and say, okay, this is what we're going to work on the next 1 year. And we will have a strategy on, okay, we get more headcounts, drone headcounts, whatever, right? So we can do all this resourcing. That's not the hard part. But that has consistently helped me. So no matter where we scale up the program, today it's ProdSec, offensive security and stuff, which we are doing. Tomorrow it could be something else. But the general strategy stays, that definitely helps. You get the right guys and trust them.
Got it. I think that's great. That's a great note to end on. So, thank you, MJ, for your time today. I really appreciate sharing your experiences with the community. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Stay tuned for one of our next episodes coming up soon.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate you bringing me in, and thank you for this experience. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Purple Book Podcast, home of the world's top security leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, find more content from our experts at thepurplebook.club. Remember, it's thepurplebook.club, not .com. Follow us at the Purple Book Community on LinkedIn and Purple Community on Twitter. Until next time, these are your hosts and guests signing off.